Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, brother, for your introduction. I don't deserve most of those characteristics you've given me, but nonetheless, it's an honor to be here, especially the fact that the discussion is a very pertinent discussion, something in the modern times that's needed, something we need to discuss a lot about. And therefore, I feel very honored to be here, and thank you for gracing this program and giving us the opportunity to discuss. And I begin, therefore, of course, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and I bid you all peace and mercy and grace. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The subject is evolution in God, and obviously these are topics that get hotly debated a lot of times. And I always feel that a lot of times the debates get sort of sidetracked because a lot of times we don't understand the concepts, or maybe we don't fully understand or grasp the meaning of the terminologies. And therefore we have a tendency to segregate ideas, and then we fight on one side versus the other. Whereas in reality, there is always an overlap in everything that we talk about. That's the masterful system of the universe, that no matter how we address whatever we address, somehow there is an overlap in what we call a sharing of realities as well as the physical states. So the issue, first and foremost, I'd like to establish very clearly is, are these two issues, evolution and God, irreconcilable, or are they really naturally part of one idea that just has somehow, over a span of time, due to some misunderstandings or due to some particular positions that one side is taken versus the other? First and foremost, evolution as we understand it from an Islamic perspective is not rejected. Islam does not reject evolution as a principle where something can evolve from something else. There is no verse in the Quran where Allah forbids it, and therefore we have to be silent about it and say maybe it's possible. And we have to take that position very clearly, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us in many ways that He created things. God created things according to the Quranic principles. He created things, but that methodology of creation could have been, one of those could have been evolution. So there is no rejection per se that evolution necessarily does not exist or it's false, for there's plenty of evidence to show some kind of movement where we have some form of movement within the created beings as sharing some similar qualities. And therefore one needs to be very careful whether to say, well, this is categorically a no-no, or it's categorically possible, or it is absolutely possible. On all these three sides, as we will understand, you will see that there are problems. For those who believe in the existence of God, for example, who insist that creation is, and it's interesting, by the way, we have branded them as the creationists. And then on the opposite side, you've got these evolutionists. And this creates this segregated thought, once again, which creates problems, because the minute you start talking, the minute you've divided this discussion, the minute you start stepping over onto the other side, someone says, oh, you've just given up your position, you've become a little bit of me. So if the evolutionist starts speaking about some mode of creation, he says, oh, you become a creationist. And the minute you're a creationist and you start speaking a little bit about evolution, you said, oh, you become an evolutionist. It's almost like there's this argument that either you're on this side or on that side. And I think we need to address this carefully to understand that evolution is just a process. It's a system that even Richard Dawkins, when he was questioned on this particular issue, as much as he's written about the non-existence of God, even the book, The God Delusion, he cannot answer this question as to what is the issue as far as how did this all originate from. Evolution is a process, it's a methodology, it's a system. It is still in flux as far as we're understanding it. Our understanding of evolution is very minimal. Very, very, very minimal. Even Colin Patterson, who was a paleontologist in England, said that we know very little about evolution and its system. Because first of all, macroevolution especially is not very observable. It's very difficult to observe it. It's very difficult to replicate it in a laboratory. So we have issues pertaining to that. But the concept, the ideas are certainly entertainable, and they are realities, and one should not reject them categorically. What we have problems here with, and I'm touching on a few different subjects, but I'm just trying to draw a clear picture for us that I think there is a misunderstanding in the concepts which has brought about this segregation of ideas. So fundamentally, let me give you the Islamic perspective, and then we can discuss the other perspectives and hopefully put some sense into it. From the Islamic perspective, it's very clear that the absolute creator, God, is the fashioner and the creator of everything. Because we understand rationally from nothing comes nothing. We are something, okay, and we were nothing before, and therefore we have to establish somehow where did we come from? Where did all this start from? That's very important to understand. Okay. Now, there are different arguments about this. One says, well, we came through probabilities and it was just a chance that we were born and we were created. There's another that says, no, it's impossible. From nothing comes nothing. There has to be an intelligent designer to have put us together. Otherwise, it's impossible. The system is just too complex and too structured and too well formulated and too universal for it to have simply randomly appeared from nowhere, from thin air, from this primordial soup. Even this primordial soup that we talk about, where did it come from? At the end of the day, we have to think about that reality of something existing when it was nothing before. Unless we can prove that whatever has been existing here has always existed, okay, then it's a different matter. But there is no evidence whatsoever to show that. None whatsoever, first of all. There is no evidence to show that. We know that there was a beginning. Particularly when you speak about the Big Bang Theory, it's very clear. Even Stephen Hawking speaks about this issue, that prior to Planck's moment, 1 times 10 to the minus 43 second, we cannot talk scientifically because all laws of sciences fall apart. And we understand that. So we have to stop at that moment and not discuss anything further. If you want to be philosophical about it, you can. But scientifically speaking, all the instruments of science cease to exist. Thus, there's nothing one can use unless one wants to be speculative. So having established this particular position that from an Islamic point of view, God is the creator of everything. He is the one who brings everything into existence. He is the one who is eternal, who has no beginning, no end. Now, Bertrand Russell, a famous atheist, used to ask the question that since everything needs a maker, or it needs a predecessor, who was God's predecessor? This was a classic question that Bertrand Russell asked. Who was God's creator? Who created God? Now, that's a very valid question. But we have to understand in the scheme of the realities of the life that we live in, that first and foremost, we're looking at a relative world. You and I exist in a relative realm, where time, matter, space, time-space continuum are parts of our superstructure that give us who we are and makes us who we are. Okay? We know that at Planck's moment, at the Big Bang moment, we know that all of these didn't exist and they came into existence. Now we beg the argument, the question is, what is it that caused this? Now we understand from a philosophical argument, and maybe through logic in terms of reversing our logic and going back and saying, well, what started it all? We realize that whatever started it must not have been relative, must not have been bound in time, nor matter, nor space, nor time-space continuum. Now you might say, well, isn't that pushing the envelope a little too far? Well, this is where the philosophical argument comes in. And that I'd like to establish very clearly, that at the end of the day, as scientific as we may want to be, one has to put some kind of a philosophical spin to it, otherwise it's impossible to understand anything in science. For example, in science we understand that science really, if you go into pure science, we're looking at empirical observations. And empiricists observe everything systematically, they lay things down very carefully, they monitor it, and they even question the integrity of the observation. Because sometimes the observation could be skewed on the basis of some biases that we may have placed. As a result, it's very important to make the process as pure and as clean as possible so that the results are corroborated or at least as valid as possible. And that's logical. So scientifically speaking, we have a systematic approach in a scientific system. But that's just empirical observation. So if I observe the expansion of the universe, and I've made a notation of it, correct? And I've shown the redshift, and I'm showing that the universe is expanding, okay, that's nice and dandy. What do you do after that? Well, I'm going to tie in this and with that. Okay, at the end of the day, I can make all the observations in the world. I can observe atoms, I can go subatomically to observe, I can observe superstructures, then what? Do I stop? He says, well, now you're a scientist. You've made total observations. Okay, then what do I do with all of this observation? Do I tie it in with something? Do I make sense out of it? Oh, make sense out of it. What does it mean, make sense? Oh, I'm going to now describe what's happening. But am I being very scientific here? Maybe my description is very experiential, which may be biased, and I may be putting a spin on it to see it the way I want on the basis of how I see the world. Now what happens? Suddenly you start treading into the philosophical realm, and now you start spinning ideas based on what you've just seen, which is a classical issue with regards to morality, for example, in ethics. Ethics are unobservable in pure science and empiricists. Empiricists cannot observe the concept of good and evil. There's no concept of good and evil in the universe. Cosmologically speaking, even when we look empirically, and you observe chemistry, for example, there's no such thing as good chemistry and evil chemistry. Chemistry is chemistry. Biology is biology. When I dissect a creature, I see what's happening, and I see mechanisms, I write it down, and I can somehow manipulate that through cause and effect. Okay, nice. Then what? Then why do I have a board of ethicists? In recombinant DNA, for example, you've got a board of ethicists that manage what kind of research you can do when it comes to genetic engineering, for example. Why do I have a board of ethicists? If science is the foundation of everything, then science should be above the board of ethicists, and science should dictate what is ethical and what is not. So we understand that there are issues of ethics, there are issues of emotions and ideologies and visions and fantasies, etc., that are part and parcel of our existence. For example, the concept of intelligence. How do you ever measure intelligence outside of something that's indirectly measured? You can't measure intelligence directly. Love. It's a concept that lies dormant in a being, but no one has ever observed love. It's impossible. Love can only be observed secondarily from a reaction of something else. And therefore we can conclude, oh, this person loves this. These concepts are outside of pure empirical observations. Put these visions together, now it brings us forth into the idea that from an Islamic perspective, whatever systems there are, in the biological systems, in what we call in the physical systems of the universe, they're part and parcel of this created system. So to answer that initial question as to who is the maker of God, we understand clearly from this argument, from a rational argument, that God does not have a maker. Someone says, aha, isn't that precisely what you've just stated, that everything has to have a beginning? Well, if you go out of the relative world and break that time-space continuum, then yes, it makes sense that it has no beginning. Because now time becomes a matter of a frame of reference, and which is the key. To give you a simple example, and this is an empirical, it's a logical example, it's a rational example. People may argue about it, but it's really very, very foolproof if you really think about it. My existence is dependent on a predecessor, whose existence is dependent on that predecessor, whose existence is dependent on that predecessor. I would have to take that to infinity. Okay? I would have to take that to infinity. That's the concept. But now notice here, and I want you to underline the word infinity. This notion of infinity existing within the realm of science, if you really examine it, what is its definition? Where does it lie in the scope of all of science? We know everything moves towards infinity. Okay, calculus is entirely built on this idea of infinity, yet it's not describable. It's outside of description. Even mathematical computations fail if you try to manipulate infinity. But here's the interesting thing now. It moves to infinity. So therefore, logically, I can never exist because there's an infinity of waiting. But I rationally say, I do exist. Thus, whatever created me must not have been dependent of a predecessor, which is what we call the first cause, the immovable mover. These are all teleological, cosmological, ontological arguments that have been brought forth for the existence of God. Now, to give you a good example, and I'm going to jump, and then inshallah, when we discuss this further, I say inshallah, those of you who don't understand, meaning God willing, we'll discuss that further. To give you a good example, Antony Flew, a well-known atheist, lived for almost all his life rejecting the existence of God. A very, very thorough man when it came to his empirical observations and examinations. He was an ardent proponent of the belief that God does not exist. Recently, 2004, he relinquished his position and became a deist. And let me quote him to sort of put this into perspective as to what I'm trying to say. He says, he was asked, he says that teleological argument was what really convinced him for the existence of this God that we're talking about, the first cause. He says, he's asked, he says, nothing convinced you but teleological arguments? He says, absolutely. It seems to me that Richard Dawkins constantly overlooks the fact that Darwin himself, in the 14th chapter of The Origin of Species, pointed out that his whole argument began with a being which already possessed reproductive powers. Okay? This is the creature, the evolution of which a truly comprehensive theory of evolution must give some account. Darwin himself was well aware that he had not produced such an account. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research has provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. So he says, it seems to me that the case for an Aristotelian God who has the characteristics of power and also intelligence is now much stronger than it ever was before. Basically stating that there had to be an intelligent designer to bring forth this whole system into play. So the argument, bottom line, when we say evolution, God, can they be reconciled? Okay, in my opinion, this is just a product of events in history that has taken place that has basically put us into two different regions. You know, we become very segregated in this idea when in fact they're all part of one. And tonight, within this brief introduction, I'd like to just simply present this idea that the reason, by the way, people have a problem in the belief in God is because one has to take a certain leap of faith, because we're talking about a being that cannot be measured in the realm of science. One has to take a leap of faith. This is where science has a problem, and I don't blame it. I don't expect science to take a leap of faith and say there is a God. Science is a tool. It's a mechanism of observations, and it's got a system. Leave it there. No one has asked it to become a believer. We must use it as means by which, as a tool to reach our own objectives as human beings. At the end of the day, science is a methodology that we came forth to use in this spectacular system. But we have also intelligently understood that the scientific system has got a set of fixed laws, what we call the laws of constants, for example, universal constants. These constants, which, by the way, instantaneously set in motion at Planck's moment, it did not go through an evolutionary process. It instantaneously established itself, sets the pace that how does this expansion of the universe and the whole system of evolution take place if this superstructure did not exist. So we're not talking about the little piece of structure that's within a structure. We're talking about the entire system. Where did it come from? That's one. Number two, the origin of life. There is not a shred of evidence to date with all scientific research that we have on Earth where anybody on Earth knows where origin of life came from. There is not a shred of evidence where life originated from. There is none. To my knowledge, there is none. Even if you go on websites, they're even offering $1 million for anyone to come up with any kind of a theory that would establish the origin of life. We don't know. And even Antony Flew says that it's impossible for this life, which Behe, for example, speaks about irreducible complexity in the DNA, it's impossible for this thing to have simply come out of pure chance. It's impossible. Which then brings forth the idea of intelligent design, okay? Which then takes a person either to the level of being a deistic person, to the level of being a theistic person. A theistic person basically implies that God exists, but he also manages my day-to-day affairs from an ethical point of view. Antony Flew is a deist. He says, no, I don't believe in the God of the Christians or the Muslims, but I do believe in a maker who started it all. Just like what Einstein believed. Einstein believed in a deistic God. And interestingly, when you study these people, the main reason they're deistic is because they cannot reconcile the existence of evil in the system of God's creation. Which once again is a misconception in their point, because evil in reality is not a bad thing. If you take evil as a physical entity, then it's absurd, because there's no such thing as an entity existing in any physical state that one can call evil. It doesn't exist. Evil is a reaction to a choice one makes through volition to reject the good. Wow, this is a whole different aspect of the existence of evil. Otherwise, an explosion, an implosion, blood seeping out, a bullet entering somebody's skull, a person falling, a person dying, whatever, none of these entities can be called evil. These are just processes of movement from point A to point B. It's got nothing else to do with evil or good. So this establishes this basic idea from the Islamic perspective that all of this can be reconciled. But the idea of abiogenesis, where life spontaneously generated as the initial cause of all living organisms, is a theory that is weakening by the hour. It has no merit. Okay? So I'd like to, so basically now in conclusion, in my introduction to this, and I think we will tackle more with the Q&A session, because I think there are many other good issues to talk about. From an Islamic perspective, and this is very important for us to understand, we must not think that science, because many times Muslims come to me also and ask me, brother, you know, this evolution and all of science, you know, is this a bad thing? I said, no, science is one of the greatest gifts God has given us. It's one of the greatest tools we've been given. And in my opinion, thank God for science, that it's brought some senility, how do I use the right word? It has brought some truthful reality in terms of observation in our faith because of a scientific process. Imagine being emotional in our religious pursuits toward God. And here's an interesting example. Someone says, oh, God spoke to me. Oh, I have this message from God I need to deliver. And there's no way of observing. This is, by the way, Sir Karl Popper in his period of time during Karl Marx's period of time, and that period of time where people were coming up with all these ideas, you know, that everything is explainable through some kind of a philosophical argument. He says, wait a minute, this is insane. I need to grasp this. I need to gauge this. He says, he developed a system called falsifiability, where something has to be falsifiable for it to make sense, or whether if it can be falsified, then it has some credibility. So you notice that in time, mankind has developed rigid and strict systems to manage all these ideas that come towards us, which we have to process in our living and lifestyles and how we manage things, which I think is great. And science, being as rigid as it is and having a very thorough methodology, is a great gift unto mankind, in my opinion. It's not something that's contrary to religion or contrary to the belief in God. That system is a fantastic system. Let me make a quick point from an Islamic perspective. We talk about miracles, for example. It says miracles are things that defy common science. We call that. Where God comes in to the believer who believes in a higher deity, that God comes in and he manipulates the physics, okay, of whatever this individual is living in and brings about something which is extraordinary. Now, to a scientist who's very methodical and very stuck in a structural way, finds this to be problematic. He says, how are you going to do this? What you're saying is then anything can be brought as a miracle. You know, somebody can do something and say, oh, it was a miracle. In reality, when you really go deep, you'll see that from the Islamic perspective, we do have miracles, but they all follow the methods of science. They're not outside the methods of science. Okay. To give you a simple example, and that, by the way, that reality of understanding of what something is a miracle or not is on the basis of our knowledge of science. So if I go back 1,000 years and somebody brings a PC and he's able to, or brings a wireless, instrument and starts talking to somebody on the other side, says, miracle. That's a miracle. Why is it a miracle? Oh, because no one's ever done this. This is beyond science. We would call this supernatural event, wouldn't we? But in reality, it's a scientific event, just that our knowledge was limited and we didn't understand it. And I truly believe that there is a vast ocean of information out there that we still need to understand, which will bring greater understandings for us, that maybe crossing through wormholes and going to the other side of the universe is a possibility. So all the Star Trek stuff that we've been talking about, where people get beamed and someone says, oh, this is science fiction. Not really. It's very possible. And that's the wonderful system that God has created, that mankind has been allowed the tools by which to examine, to manipulate, to manage, to create, and to destroy. But here the creation, we understand by definition, is not creating something from nothing, but taking something and making it something else. That power of being able to take something and make it into something else is a phenomenal power given to mankind and given to all the creatures of this universe, whoever can manipulate it when and how they need it, which I think is a great system. So in conclusion, this idea, God versus evolution from the Islamic perspective, is just simply a misnomer. There are certain issues within evolution where did humans evolve from apes, for example? Okay, this is a question that one has to answer. From the Islamic perspective, what does Islam have to say about this issue? The Quran is very clear on this issue, that Adam was created and placed on earth. To the scientists, of course, he says that's impossible. Everything is within a system. We have to have come from some branch or some tree, some genus, some species must have been our predecessor, because that's the system we're willing to observe. I said that is a system, but it's not the only system. Okay? It is a system. Because if you're going to stick to this system, then you have to answer to the question is, how did this system become a system? Because then it needs a branch too. And now you're going to take it to infinity, which doesn't make sense once again. So there had to have been some kind of a beginning, and whether creatures came into play and started a new branch, which then followed either what we call adaptation, or we talk about evolution. Bottom line is the systems are not to be negated, but the bottom line is one still has to ask the question of an intelligent designer that has brought about this spectacular system. There are those who vociferously reject an intelligent designer, and I think by rejecting it, it's more being philosophical and ideological and dogmatic, in my opinion. There's one way to say that I reject it from an agnostic position, that I'm not certain, but to say that there is no God, okay, is really putting the cart in front of the horse. Because lack of evidence is never evidence for an argument. For one to say that God doesn't exist because I have no evidence, that's tantamount to absurdity in the court of law. One cannot say that I don't believe in God because I have no evidence. You can be an agnostic and say I'm not sure, but you can certainly not say that I don't believe. So those who work very hard in using the Darwinian theories, for example, to try to establish the non-existence of God have pushed the envelope too far, in my opinion. And of course, from the religious point of view, from those who believe in a God, to bring in these ideological concepts of certain kinds of miracles and events which contradict empirical science are also pushing the envelope a little too far, in my opinion. There has to be a balancing point between these two, where an individual can say, okay, both sides have a rational position, rather than simply coming in and manipulating things on the basis of something that we have a belief in. So even my belief in my religion, for example, to give an example, if as a Muslim I believe in the Quran as my scripture that guides my ethical and moral values. The Quran is not a book of science, though it has shown me scientific issues, but it is not a book of science. It is a book of everything, including science. It's holistic. Okay? Now, one would say, well, how do you know that that book is correct? Well, it's a matter of checking it and questioning its integrity over time, just like anything else. You know, I can see something. You say, how do you know that thing exists? Well, you examine it. Maybe it's an illusion. If I can prove it's an illusion, then I can tell you it doesn't exist. But if I can prove it's not an illusion, then I'll prove to you that it exists. And the validity of a book that's ethical in moral values has to be put forth in the scheme of things, along with the sciences, along with all the perspectives, and say, what about this book is contradictory to common sense? If it is, then it becomes a point of contention that can be argued about. But at the same time, one has to also question the integrity of the source of the book. To say that we've got a collection of verses or statements made which has suddenly become a divine source of guidance, but then the system of how this book was put together is so loose and so questionable that you have no idea where the origin came from, then obviously that begs the question that you may want to beg from this verse that this is exactly what happened and science has to bend over backwards to meet this one. Now that's really pushing it once again too far. So I think there's a fine point balance which God has built in our system, which I think is a wonderful system. So whether we are atheists, deists, or believers in God, or many gods, it doesn't matter. What matters is the process that we follow and give it what we call a concrete methodology, and then we take it as it goes. From an Islamic perspective, the belief in the hereafter is fundamental, which brings about this whole issue of God and religion, the concept of justice, the concept of evil, the concept of good. All these realities have to be met with a clear understanding of a holistic human being who lives within the spectrum of science, ethics, ideologies, etc., which brings about the completion of who we are. So I hope I made sense in this short, brief presentation that in reality, it's not us versus them or this versus that. I think at the end of the day, they both have their positions and we need to reconcile them. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.